In 1980, Saddam Hussein rolled his tanks into Iran. He figured it would be a quick fight, over in a few weeks. Well, he was wrong. What he started was a brutal, 8-year-long war, the last total war of the 20th century, and it completely redrew the map of the Middle East. So let's dive into how this all went so wrong, and the scars it left behind.
To really get a sense of this war, you have to start with this number. Over 1 million casualties. That's killed and wounded combined. And that's a conservative estimate. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around that level of loss. This wasn't some distant conflict. It scarred entire generations.
And behind that huge number, you have millions of individual stories of trauma. This quote from an Iraqi medic, man, it just says it all. For the people who actually lived through this, the war never really ended. That smell, that memory, it stays with you. So how in the world did this all kick off? Well, it all started with a huge gamble. Saddam Hussein saw what he thought was a golden opportunity, a moment of weakness, and he decided to roll the dice and invade his neighbor. It was a calculation that would prove to be dead wrong.
Okay, to understand why he took that gamble, you have to understand the two sides. They couldn't have been more different. On one side, you have Saddam's Iraq, run by a secular Arab nationalist party, led by a Sunni minority ruling over a Shia majority. On the other side, you have Khomeini's Iran, a brand new Persian Shia theocracy that was, still in total chaos after its own revolution. These two were on a collision course.
So what was going through Saddam's head? Well, it was this potent cocktail of fear and, frankly, raw ambition. He was terrified that Iran's Shia revolution would spill over and inspire Iraq's own Shia majority to rise up against him. But he also saw his chance to be the top dog in the Arab world, maybe grab some of Iran's oil-rich land, and do it all while Iran looked like it was falling apart at the seams.
And things escalated fast. I mean, really fast. After the '79 revolution in Iran, you had border skirmishes, angry speeches, a failed coup that made Iran's military look even weaker. Every single event seemed to be another green light for Saddam. So he just tore up a treaty and sent the tanks rolling.
But that quick, glorious victory Saddam was dreaming of, it never happened, not even close. Instead, the war immediately got bogged down and turned into something out of a history book, a horrific, grinding stalemate that looked a lot more like World War I.
Yeah, that Iraqi blitzkrieg just stalled. The Iranians didn't collapse, they fought back like lions, the Iraqis had all sorts of logistical problems, and suddenly their grand invasion turned into a complete meat grinder, brutal street-to-street fighting in city after city.
And this is where we have to talk about Iran's most tragic and probably most controversial weapon, the Basiji. This was a volunteer militia filled with men and even boys, some as young as 12 years old. They were driven by this incredible religious fervor and patriotism, and they were thrown into the fight with almost nothing.
I mean, just listen to this. This is from a 13-year-old boy who volunteered. It's devastating. It completely cuts through all the propaganda and shows you the absolute horror of sending children to war. Can you imagine being that kid? It's just unbelievable.
So to fight back against Iraq's superior firepower, Iran used its one big advantage: people. They mobilized huge numbers of these Basiji volunteers for what became known as human wave attacks. They would literally send waves of these kids and men, sometimes right into minefields, just to overwhelm the Iraqi lines. It was horrifying, but in a brutal, bloody way, it worked. It cleared the way for the regular army and let them start taking back territory.
So, with the fighting on the ground stuck in this horrific stalemate, both sides started looking for new ways to get an edge. And that's when this regional war exploded and started dragging the entire world into it.
First, it spread to the sea. Iraq started hitting oil tankers coming out of Iran to try and strangle their economy. Iran, of course, hit back and even threatened to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, which is a major artery for the world's oil. Suddenly, everyone's paying attention. The US, the Soviets, NATO, they all sent warships steaming into the Persian Gulf.
At the very same time, the war came home for ordinary people in the most terrifying way imaginable. Iraq started launching missile strikes right into the middle of Iranian cities, like Tehran. The goal was pure terror, to break the will of the people. Iran fired back. All of a sudden, the front line wasn't some trench in the desert, it was your neighborhood.
So what did the big global powers think about all this? Well,
This quote from Henry Kissinger pretty much sums up the cold, cynical attitude of the time. The U.S. was officially neutral, but let's be real. They saw Saddam as the lesser of two evils. The policy was basically to make sure neither side got a clear win, which of course just made the war drag on and on.
And just when you think this war can't possibly get any worse, it does. Iraq unleashes one of the most horrific weapons of the 20th century, not just on its enemies, but on its own people.
March 16, 1988. It's a date that should be burned into our memory. On that day, the Iraqi regime attacked the Kurdish town of Halabja. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a mistake. It was a direct, deliberate chemical weapon attack on their own citizens.
And this is what it was like. A survivor described smelling something like apples, and then just waking up to total annihilation. Nerve gas doesn't make a sound. It just silently erases thousands of lives. It was an absolutely monstrous war crime.
Now here's the really sickening part. The world knew this was happening. But because so many powerful countries were terrified of an Iranian victory, they basically looked the other way. They quietly supported Iraq. And so the response to these chemical attacks was, well, it was basically silence. And the horror was allowed to continue.
So after 8 long years of this relentless slaughter, the war doesn't end with some glorious victory parade. It just burns out. It ends with 2 countries completely and utterly broken.
By 1988, there was just nothing left in the tank. Both economies were shattered. Both militaries were exhausted. Iran in particular was cut off from weapons supplies and just couldn't keep fighting. The war had reached a point of what you'd call mutual destruction.
The end finally came with a UN-brokered ceasefire. But for Iran's leader Ayatollah Khomeini, who had rallied his people for a holy war, accepting a truce without a clear victory was agonizing. He famously said it was like drinking poison. That tells you everything you need to know about how they felt.
And here it is, the final bill for Saddam's 8-year gamble. Just look at these numbers. Over $1 trillion gone, almost 2 million people wounded, and hundreds upon hundreds of thousands killed, with Iran suffering the most. All of it for absolutely nothing.
Which leaves us with one last haunting question. After 8 years of unimaginable destruction, after all that money and all those lives, with no borders changed, what was the point? Who actually won? The war left behind a legacy of debt, anger, and instability that would fuel the next wars in the region. So, who won? The only real answer is that everybody lost.